Chapter 4 is the first chapter in our section on managing individuals. In this chapter, we focus on perception and diversity, looking at how the perceptual process in organizations affect the manner in which managers manage diversity. With each chapter, it is important to keep in mind the key learning objectives outlined in the chapter opener. When you finish studying Chapter 4, you should be able to describe perception and the social information processing model. You should be able to identify and explain managerial implications for social perception, and you should be able to explain attribution theory. After reading the material in Chapter 4, you should also be able to demonstrate familiarity with demographic trends as they pertain to workplace diversity, identify challenges associated with managing diversity, and discuss organizational practices used to effectively manage diversity. Let's begin with our discussion of the social information processing model on the next slide. Perception is the concept that helps us understand how people see and act in the world. For our purposes in studying OB, we focus on social perception rather than object perception, since we are most interested in people. Social perception can be analyzed with the help of the social information processing model. This model takes into consideration competing stimuli in the environment, such as people and events, demonstrates how we process and interpret information, how we retain it, and ultimately how we use that information to make decisions. On the next slide, we'll see how this model works in 4 stages. The social information processing model of perception provides a graphical representation of the development of social perception. Social perception involves a 4-stage information processing sequence that is shown here and can be studied in depth by turning to Figure 4-1 in your text. Essentially, social perception includes selective attention and comprehension, encoding and simplification of the information, storage and retention of the information, and finally, retrieval and response using the stored information. The first step is attention and comprehension. Attention is the act of being consciously aware of something or someone. We know that people pay attention to events, people, activities, etc. in the environment that are interesting and/or important to them. This importance is termed salience and is defined as something that stands out from the context in which it occurs. The second step in the social perception model is the encoding and simplification of the events, activities, and stimuli generated in the attention comprehension phase. Individuals encode and simplify information by using cognitive categories and schema, which help create a mental picture of an event or object. During the encoding and simplification step of the process, we may use stereotypes to help shape our perceptions. We'll discuss more on stereotypes in the next slide. Moving forward in our social information processing model, we turn to Stage 3 in the process associated with the storage and retention of information. Memory is of key importance in the overall perceptual process. Finally, Stage 4 of the social information processing model is retrieval of information and response generation. Responses are typically decisions that have been made based on information processed and stored in our memories. Recall that the second stage in our model involves encoding and simplification. It is this stage that stereotypes can affect our perceptions. Stereotypes are beliefs about the characteristics of a group and are not always negative. The problem with stereotypes is that they may or may not be accurate and therefore are questionable in terms of reliability. The over-reliance on stereotypes can lead to poor decision-making. Bias can also result from the use of stereotypes, thus creating barriers for groups based on age, ethnicity, physical abilities, and so on. Stereotypes can undermine loyalty to the organization and reduce job satisfaction. Stereotyping is a form of perceptual development. As such, individuals who engage in the process of stereotyping usually follow 4 steps. First, they categorize people into groups according to a set of criteria. Next, they infer that all people within that category possess all the same traits, and from that, create expectations of others and interpret their behavior so that it conforms to our perception or stereotype. The fourth step in the process involves maintaining stereotypes. Individuals maintain stereotypes by overestimating the frequency of the behavior exhibited by those in the target group, incorrectly explaining their behavior, and differentiating minority individuals from oneself. As you can imagine, the results of the encoding phase of the social information processing model of perception, which may include stereotyping, can result in a number of perceptual errors. You'll want to refer to Table 4-1 in your text to read more about the 5 types of common errors listed: halo, leniency, central tendency, recency effects, and contrast effects. The table lists a description, examples of each type, and recommended solutions. Before we move on to the next learning objective in our chapter, you should review the impact that each of these stages has on organizations as they interview, hire, conduct performance reviews, and determine leadership qualities in their employees. Let's move on to discuss the idea of causal attributions. Causal attributions are the suspected and inferred causes of someone's behavior. The causes of behavior can be attributed to the individual, him or herself, or to factors beyond the individual involved. The text lists several examples of causal attribution that impact our study of OB. For example, managers might attribute poor performance by an employee to laziness, lack of effort, or lack of ability. The attribution made will impact the decisions that manager makes regarding performance appraisals and the way he or she treats those employees. One important model that helps us to explain how these causal attributions are formulated is Kelly's model of attribution, which we will discuss on the next slides. Kelly's model of attribution addresses both internal and external factors leading to behavior. Internal factors are those personal characteristics that are said to cause behavior. External factors are thus environmental characteristics that are said to elicit the behavior. We have covered that it is important to understand causal attribution, as it is greatly influenced by perceptual factors. We can now pose the question as to how one infers either internal or external factors leading to observed behavior. Kelly's model of attribution provides the basis for understanding how these inferences are drawn. The 3 standards of judgment, or heuristics, that we'll discuss in this slide, in Kelly's model of attribution are consensus, distinctiveness, and consistency. Consensus relates to other people, distinctiveness relates to performance, while consistency relates to time. Let's discuss each of these standards in more depth. Consensus is a heuristic tool that is used in attribution and involves a comparison of an individual's behavior with that of his peers. High consensus would indicate that an individual is behaving in a similar manner to his or her peers. Low consensus indicates that an individual is acting differently than his or her peers. Distinctiveness involves comparing a person's behavior on one task with the behavior from other tasks. High distinctiveness indicates comparable behavior. Low distinctiveness indicates one individual's behavior is different from peers. The heuristic of consistency is used to determine whether an individual's performance on a given task is consistent over time. High consistency suggests that the same pattern is repeated consistently over time. Low consistency suggests that the behavior only happened once or is uncommon to the individual. Kelly's model of attribution tells us that people will attribute behavior to environmental factors or external causes when they perceive high consensus, high distinctiveness, and low consistency. Internal attributions, on the other hand, occur when a low consensus, low distinctiveness, and high consistency pattern is perceived. Understanding attribution tendencies can help us understand how perception can be distorted. Fundamental attribution bias is a process where an individual ignores environmental factors that are affecting behavior and erroneously attributes the behavior to that individual. A self-serving bias is the tendency for individuals to assume more personal responsibility for success and to find outside causes for failure. What are the managerial implications associated with attribution errors or bias? Managers tend to disproportionately attribute behavior to internal causes. That is, managers tend to more often than not commit a fundamental attribution error. Once these conclusions are reached and the perception is formed, managers acting on this faulty information are likely to act inappropriately. The research has also shown that employees' attributions for their own performance has a dramatic effect on subsequent motivation, performance, and self-esteem. Diversity is a variable that must be considered across all organizational behavior concepts. Managing diversity in a global economy represents a significant challenge for today's managers. Diversity can be based on many different factors, and it is defined as the host of individual differences that make people different from and similar to each other. The concept of diversity is central to an understanding of management and organizational behavior. There are 4 layers or dimensions of diversity, as seen in this slide and in Figure 4.3 from your text. These are the organizational dimensions, external dimensions, internal dimensions, and personality. Organizational dimensions include functional level classifications, seniority, location, union affiliation, and management status. External dimensions include marital status, educational background, income, and recreational habits. Internal dimensions focus on age, race, gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. And finally, in the center of the layers is personality. The U.S. government has promulgated various policies and laws regulating the workplace and guide management action. Many organizations have endorsed affirmative action as a mechanism to manage diversity in their organizations. Formally defined, affirmative action includes voluntary and involuntary efforts to achieve equality of opportunity for everyone. Within organizations, managing diversity is an important consideration. Managing diversity from a formal perspective suggests the creation of organizational changes that enables all people to perform up to their maximum potential. Demographic trends suggest that the labor force and organizations will continue to become more diverse over time. While many organizations have made tremendous strides forward in celebrating diversity, several challenges remain unsolved. Women and minorities are experiencing a glass ceiling and are unable to experience upward mobility beyond a particular level. Racial groups are encountering perceived discrimination. There is, in some instances, a mismatch between workers' educational attainment and occupational requirements, and the workforce is aging. Let's discuss further the reality that women and minorities are experiencing a glass ceiling. What is a glass ceiling? It is defined as an invisible barrier blocking women and minorities from top management positions. The text described evidence and statistics to support this reality. Research has shown that the top 4 strategies that are critical towards breaking the glass ceiling include consistently exceeding performance expectations, developing a style with which male managers are comfortable, seeking out difficult or challenging assignments, and having influential mentors. We have also noted in our discussion of demographic trends that there is a mismatch between educational attainment and the occupation's requirements for a job. This results in underemployment, which is defined as the taking of a job that requires less education, training, or skills than those possessed by a worker. The implications for this mismatch between education and job requirements are both short and long-term. American companies are more likely to outsource technical work to countries like India and China, to hire more immigrants to fill entry-level positions, and to spend more money on employee training. There are several barriers and challenges to managing diversity effectively. Many of these barriers stem from perceptual biases and errors of attribution. The major barriers and challenges include inaccurate stereotypes and the prejudice that is associated with them. Perceptions of superiority in the form of ethnocentrism, unsupportive and hostile working environment for diverse employees, and the lack of political savvy on the part of diverse employees. In addition to the barriers to effectively managing diversity, there are major challenges that face us. These challenges include the difficulty in balancing career and family issues, fears of reverse discrimination, and resistance to change. In order to overcome these barriers and to successfully address the challenges associated with managing diversity, there are specific diversity initiatives that can be considered. Let's finish our lecture with a look at some of the practices used to manage diversity. Accountability practices can be implemented by organizations where the focus is on treating diverse employees fairly. Development practices can be focused on preparing diverse employees for greater responsibility and advancement. Recruitment practices used by the organizations can be focused on attracting qualified, diverse employees at all levels. Accountability practices include top management's personal intervention, advocacy groups, and an active AAEEO committee or office. Development practices include diversity training programs, job rotation, and mentoring programs. Recruitment practices can include targeted recruitment on non-managers, partnerships with educational institutions, and recruitment incentives such as cash supplements. This concludes our lecture on Chapter 4, Understanding Social Perception and Managing Diversity.